For the first time in over 50 years, 4 human beings left this planet and headed for the moon. Not on a simulation, not in a training exercise, on a real rocket, on a real trajectory, with real people strapped to the top of the most powerful launch vehicle NASA has ever built. And this time, we had cameras for all of it. This is the complete story of Artemis II, the most important human spaceflight mission of the 21st century. Every stage, every problem, every jaw-dropping moment explained exactly the way it happened. At 6:35 p.m. local time on April 1, 2026, NASA's Space Launch System rocket lifted off from Launch Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. And before we get into everything that happened in the following 10 days, let's just sit with that sentence for a second. Human beings left Earth and went to the moon. That had not happened since December 1972. Most people watching that launch had never seen anything like it in their lifetime. I certainly hadn't. Now, as launches go, this one went about as smoothly as you could hope for. There was one brief hiccup in the minutes leading up to liftoff. Ground crews flagged a concern with readings from something called the Flight Termination System, the FTS. This is basically a string of pyrotechnic charges wired to the main fuel tanks of the rocket. It acts as a self-destruct mechanism in case the booster ever loses control during ascent. If that happens, the crew capsule fires its escape system and flies clear, and then the rocket blows itself up before it can fall on anyone. The kind of system you never want to use, but absolutely need to work correctly. That brief bit of concern pushed the actual liftoff back by about 11 minutes from the opening of the launch window at 6:24 p.m. But once engineers confirmed it was just a faulty sensor reading and the system itself was totally fine, the countdown resumed and the rocket lit up the Florida sky. This was a pleasant surprise to anyone who had been following the troubled history of the SLS. This particular rocket stack had leaked hydrogen during a systems test back in February, then started leaking helium a few days after that was fixed, which forced NASA to roll the whole vehicle back into the vehicle assembly building, take it apart, put it back together, and roll it back out. So any launch day that ends in "we lit the engines on time" counts as a win. The crew of 4 included Mission Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialist Christina Koch, all American NASA astronauts. They were joined by Canadian Space Agency mission specialist Jeremy Hansen, making him the first Canadian to fly on a crewed moon mission. And the spacecraft they were riding, the Orion capsule, they named Integrity, a nod to the international nature of the entire Artemis program, because the service module attached below the crew capsule, the cylindrical section that provides power, propulsion, and life support, was actually built in Germany under contract with the European Space Agency. Within seconds of booster ignition, Integrity and her crew rose into a clear blue sky above the Florida coast on 8.8 million pounds of thrust. 8.5 minutes into the flight, at an altitude of roughly 100 miles, the main booster engines shut down and the spacecraft separated into Earth orbit. From there, they were still connected to the upper stage of the SLS, a single engine designed to do one job, which is push the spacecraft high enough to start the trip to the moon. About an hour after launch, after the upper stage burn raised them to an altitude of roughly 43,500 miles above Earth, the crew paused at what NASA calls high Earth orbit to do a full systems check of the spacecraft. This matters more than it might sound, because this is only the second time an Orion capsule has ever flown, and the first time one has ever carried people. So before they commit to the moon, you do a top-to-bottom check of everything. And there were some issues. The first one was the toilet. The Orion capsule is equipped with something called the Universal Waste Management System, which sounds impressive until you realize the suction fan on the liquid waste hose failed to work properly. The pee hose was out. The good news is the toilet still worked for everything else. The bad news is that for number 1, the crew had to resort to what NASA calls the contingency urinal, which is a bag. So the four astronauts who just became the most elite travelers in human history were peeing into plastic bags, just like the Apollo guys, just in a more expensive spacecraft. The second issue was with their email. Their Microsoft Outlook accounts, both official NASA addresses, weren't logging in properly. And honestly, that one feels very relatable. Nobody has ever gone to the moon and had trouble with Microsoft Outlook before, but here we are. Both issues were minor. Ground controllers cleared integrity for the next major event, the translunar injection burn. In the evening of April 2nd, the mission management team unanimously voted to commit the crew to the moon. That's the formal way of saying the big engine fires and you're going whether you feel ready or not. The translunar injection burn is when the European service module's main engine fires to transition the spacecraft from an orbit around the Earth to a trajectory around the moon. And once that burn is complete, the ship is on something called a free return trajectory, which is one of the most elegant concepts in spaceflight. Here's how it works. Rather than steering the whole way there and back, the free return trajectory uses the gravity of the Earth and the moon to do most of the work. As the spacecraft approaches the moon, lunar gravity naturally swings it around the far side and throws it back in the direction it came from. Then Earth's gravity takes over and pulls it home. It's the most fuel-efficient path between these two bodies, and it's also the safest. If something goes catastrophic and the engine stops working, the physics of the trajectory will still bring the crew home. Apollo 13 used a version of this to save 3 lives in 1970. As the crew cruised away from Earth on April 3rd, they turned their cameras back toward home and took what is now one of the most important photographs in human history. It's called Hello World. Most photographs you've seen of the full Earth are composites, stitched together from dozens of separate images, because any satellite in normal orbit is simply too close to fit the whole globe in one frame. But at a distance of about 100,000 miles, there it was, the entire Earth, in a single shot, taken with a wide-angle lens on a Nikon D5 camera. And the lighting on the photograph is extraordinary. You can see the first sliver of sunlight just beginning to creep over the edge of the planet, and the rest of the Earth, the night side, is softly illuminated by light reflecting off the moon. That's called Earthshine. It would have looked much darker to the naked eye, but the Nikon D5 is renowned for capturing detail and extremely low light, and it delivered. This is our generation's version of the blue marble. Saturday and Sunday, April 4th and 5th, the crew ran tests and experiments on board as they prepared for the main event, the lunar flyby. What separates Artemis II from every single Apollo mission is the sheer distance covered. At their farthest point from Earth, 252,756 miles, this crew set a new record for the farthest any human being has ever traveled from home. That eclipsed the previous record held by the Apollo 13 crew, which had only broken the record by accident during an emergency in 1970. At roughly 4,000 miles altitude above the lunar surface during closest approach, the crew got to see the moon in a way that nobody from Apollo ever did. Those guys were orbiting just a few hundred miles up, moving around the equator, so they could only ever see one relatively small patch of surface at a time, and they never had a clear view of either pole. But the Artemis II crew, at their altitude, could see the entire moon filling their windows. Imagine holding a basketball at arm's length. That's how big the moon appeared to them. During their approach, the crew spotted 2 previously unidentified craters on the surface. One of them has been proposed to be named Integrity, after the spacecraft that carried them there. The second is a bright spot crater sitting right on the boundary between the near and far side of the moon. Commander Reed Wiseman proposed it be named Carol, after his late wife, who passed away in 2020. These bright spot craters were among the most striking observations of the mission. Fresh meteorite impacts kick up lighter-colored material from just below the surface, and against the flat gray of the moon, they pop. Christina Koch described them as looking like holes poked through a paper map shade. And that kind of observation illustrates something critical about what this mission was actually for. Even with the best digital cameras we've ever built, there is still nuance that only the human eye can see. Our visual system perceives a far wider dynamic range between dark and bright than any sensor. We see more color.
we notice texture in ways that algorithms struggle with. For example, the crew reported that the moon is not actually as gray as it appears from Earth. Up close, with their own eyes, they could make out distinct hues of brown, and in some impact crater regions, a faint green. That kind of first-hand observation is the whole point of sending people.
As Integrity drew closer, the crew began crossing the boundary between the near side and the far side of the moon. That transition is marked by one of the most ancient geological features in the solar system, the Oriental Basin. It's 600 miles wide and about 3.8 billion years old, and Artemis II was the first time any human being had ever looked at the entire thing. As the spacecraft rounded over Oriental, the far side began to reveal itself, and it is almost unrecognizable compared to the moon we see in the sky. People often call it the dark side, but that's a misnomer. It gets just as much sunlight as any other part of the moon. The difference is that this hemisphere always faces away from Earth, so we've only ever seen it through the lenses of robotic orbiters. Until now. The first thing you notice is how much lighter it is. There are none of those large dark spots that we associate with the face of the moon. Those dark patches are ancient volcanic plains, places where lava flooded into impact basins billions of years ago and cooled into dark, flat rock. The near side has a lot of them. The far side has almost none. Why the volcanic activity was concentrated on the Earth-facing hemisphere is one of the genuine open mysteries of planetary science, and one that the Artemis program is specifically designed to help solve. Without volcanic flows to smooth things out, the far side is dominated by craters, dense, overlapping, ancient craters everywhere you look. The crew photographed this most dramatically along the terminator line, the boundary between the day and night sides of the moon, where the low angle of the sun creates extreme contrast between deep shadowed valleys and brightly lit peaks. The crew noted that the surface of the moon is nowhere near as flat as it appears from a distance. There are tall peaks and sheer cliff faces around these impact craters. It is rugged and complex terrain. One of the regions they passed over was the South Pole Aitken Basin, the area where NASA is planning to land future Artemis missions. The contrast between what they saw and where Apollo landed couldn't be more stark. Apollo touched down on the flat volcanic plains of the near-side equatorial region. The terrain around the South Pole is nothing like that. Future landing crews are going to be navigating something much more technically challenging. Turning back toward home, the crew witnessed something that only a handful of humans have ever seen. Not a sunset, but an Earthset. Our planet dipping down below the horizon of the moon. It's around this point that Integrity lost contact with Earth. Not because anything went wrong, just geometry. When the moon passes between the spacecraft and Earth, it physically blocks the line of communication. For a period of about 40 minutes, these four people were completely unreachable. No signal, no contact, no connection. Just four human beings on the far side of the moon. When they came back into communication range, they were greeted by Earthrise, the same view that made the Apollo 8 photograph from Christmas Eve 1968 one of the most reproduced images in history. That one, taken by astronaut Bill Anders, showed the Earth hanging above the gray lunar horizon for the first time. Now, in 2026, we have our own version, our own Earthrise, for our own generation.
Later that same day came a moment that nobody had fully prepared for emotionally, even though it was technically expected. A total solar eclipse viewed from the far side of the moon. When we watch an eclipse from Earth, the moon and sun appear almost exactly the same size in our sky. That's a remarkable coincidence of geometry that makes our solar eclipses so dramatic. But from 4,000 miles above the lunar surface, the moon appears much larger than the sun. So when the spacecraft positioned itself with the moon between itself and the sun, it blocked the sun entirely, and the eclipse lasted nearly 54 minutes. Pilot Victor Glover later said it was the highlight of the entire mission.
The crew had seen simulations prepared by NASA's lunar science team, but when it actually happened, it was something different entirely. With the sun gone, the stars came out. The crew photographed the moon with stars and planets visible in the background, something that had never been possible on any previous lunar mission because the sun was always out. For anyone who has ever wondered why you can't see stars in photographs taken from the moon, this is the answer. It's the same reason you can't see stars in photographs taken outside on a bright, sunny day on Earth. When the sun is out, its light dominates everything. Take the sun away, and the stars appear. Artemis II was the first mission where a crew got to experience that on the far side. The day ended with a phone call from President Trump and NASA leadership congratulating the crew. From here, they had 4 days of travel ahead before re-entry. Re-entry is the part of every mission that the people watching from the ground are most nervous about, and for Artemis II, there was an extra layer of concern. The Orion capsule's heat shield, a material called Avcoat, made from epoxy resin and silica fibers, had shown unexpected erosion after the uncrewed Artemis I flight in 2022. Engineers had debated for months whether to fly Artemis II with the existing design. Ultimately, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman reviewed the data, met with engineers and outside experts, and cleared the mission to proceed. It was a calculated bet, and it paid off. Here's how re-entry works. About 20 minutes before reaching the upper atmosphere, pyrotechnic charges fire and separate the Integrity capsule from the European service module. The crew no longer needs it, and it will burn up harmlessly on its own. Once separated, the capsule fires its maneuvering thrusters to flip itself so the heat shield is pointing in the direction of travel. Then, at 400,000 feet above the surface, traveling at just under 35 times the speed of sound, Orion hit the top of the atmosphere. The capsule was moving at roughly 24,000 miles per hour. At that velocity, the air molecules don't just compress, they detonate. The energy released transforms the atmospheric gas around the spacecraft into plasma. Not just hot plasma, electrically charged plasma, between 4,000 and 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That electric charge is what causes the communications blackout, not the heat, but the charge. It's essentially like flying inside a bolt of lightning. That blackout lasted 6 minutes, 6 minutes where Mission Control stares at a silent console and waits. The only thing Orion's crew can do is ride it. The deceleration during this phase is about 3.9 times the force of gravity. If you've ever felt heavy on a roller coaster, multiply that a few times and imagine it lasting several minutes. When the signal came back, all 4 crew members were confirmed safe. The world exhaled. From there, a carefully sequenced parachute system deployed, first small drogues at around 22,000 feet to stabilize the capsule, then 3 main parachutes at around 6,000 feet, each 116 feet across, slowing the capsule from several hundred miles per hour down to about 17 to 20 miles per hour for the final descent.
At 8:07 p.m. Eastern Time on April 10th, 5:07 p.m. local time off the coast of San Diego, California, Integrity splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. Mission Control called it a perfect bullseye. A 10-day journey, 695,081 miles from Earth to the Moon and back. Done. The recovery team, operating off the USS John P. Murtha, the Navy amphibious transport ship, moved in quickly. Navy divers deployed in small boats to stabilize the capsule, attaching a sea anchor and an inflatable collar around the base. Then they installed an inflatable raft under the side hatch, called the front porch, where the crew would stage before being hoisted individually into waiting helicopters. There was one minor post-splashdown issue. Commander Wiseman reported he could hear the recovery team, but they couldn't hear him. That caused a brief delay with recovery boats circling the capsule, waiting for the communication issue to be resolved. Eventually, the team moved in, opened the side hatch from the outside, and one by one the crew dropped onto the front porch. Christina Koch was the first out, then Jeremy Hansen, then Victor Glover, who walked most of the short distance unaided, then Wiseman. All 4 astronauts reporting good health and high spirits after 10 days in space. The helicopters picked them up one at a time and flew them to the flight deck of the Mertha, where they went straight to the ship's medical bay. NASA Associate Administrator Amit Kasatria, speaking at the post-Splashdown press conference, put it simply. This mission, he said, was a gift to the world. And then, I think the path to the surface is open now. That last line is worth sitting with. Artemis II was never supposed to be the destination. It was the proof of concept, a test flight designed to validate every system on the Orion spacecraft in a deep space environment with a human crew on board. Life support, propulsion, navigation, thermal, communications, re-entry, all of it, and essentially all of it worked. The heat shield will need to be redesigned for Artemis III. NASA has acknowledged that. The toilet needs work. The Outlook situation we're going to assume is Microsoft's problem. But the mission achieved its primary objective, which was to demonstrate that human beings can safely travel to the moon and back on this architecture. And they did. Artemis III is where things get genuinely historic. That mission is currently targeted to be the first crewed lunar landing since Apollo 17 in December 1972. A crew will descend to the lunar surface near the South Pole, on that rugged terrain that the Artemis II crew just observed with their own eyes for the first time, and they will land using a modified SpaceX Starship as the descent vehicle. The terrain around the South Pole is challenging. The science is extraordinary. There is water ice in permanently shadowed craters down there, resources that could eventually support a permanent human presence on the moon.
Artemis II lasted 10 days, but what it really was is the opening act of something that will unfold over the next several decades, the steady, difficult, methodical expansion of where human beings live and work in this solar system. The last time people went to the moon, I wasn't alive. Most of the people watching this mission live weren't alive either. For most of us, going to the moon was something that happened in history books. After April 2026, it's something that happened in our lifetime. And if everything goes according to plan, the next one is a landing. That's Artemis II. I'm glad you were here for it. If you want to be here for Artemis III when it happens, subscribe. We'll cover every moment the same way we covered this one.